What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Existential Stoic podcast, episode 58. Today, we are doing an episode on the Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus. I'm Randy. I'm here with my buddy Danny. What's up, Danny?
What's up, Randy?
So today we're talking. Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
that's great. We're doing a good episode on this one because some people just don't like to read the book and they'd like to hear our opinions on it. And more than that, I mean, you teach philosophy, so it's a great perspective to have. And I live philosophy, so
Yeah,
simple
gotta
as
live
that.
it and you gotta teach it, right?
Simple as that.
I'm an exemplary figure in my own life, right?
There we go. Yeah. So
Boom.
to begin with, the myth of Sisyphus. Can you give us like a general overview? What is it?
Yeah, so it's Camus writes the Myth of Sisyphus in a work called The Myth of Sisyphus and Other Essays. And the myth is it's his rendition of a classic myth, literally from the Greco-Roman period. And most people probably know Sisyphus. It's the guy that's pushing the boulder up the mountain, right, for eternity in the underworld. So basically what Camus does is he examines this myth to sort of explore what this says about the human condition, human life, and he makes some sort of, using Sisyphus as sort of like a model, right? He tries to sort of think about what does this maybe say about human beings generally and about how we can be happy. Because one of my favorite things about the myth is the last line of Camus' rendition is he says, one must imagine Sisyphus happy. So this idea that if we examine this myth, we need to imagine that he's happy, even though this guy is being tortured, pushing a boulder up a mountain. And when it gets to the top, it rolls back down. And he has to walk back down and go get it and push it back up again. And that's his burden. It's just this constant for eternity doing this. And Camus points out in the beginning, Sisyphus is condemned to this torture for various reasons, depending on whether you read it in Greek or Roman. But usually, they say he put death in chains. He tricked, the god of the underworld to get basically back into the world again, which is actually pretty funny. He told his wife that when he dies, if she loves him, she should throw his body in the center square, like his corpse, which is totally, wrong to do. But she loves him, so she does it. And then he says to the god of the underworld, he's like, look what she did. You got to let me out so I can go punish her. And then he lets him out and he starts living, and then he doesn't want to go back down, so he just doesn't come back, and they have to go get him.
Yeah, that is awesome.
I love that book.
Yeah, I really enjoy how he was kind of like a trickster and just kind of playing around, just enjoying life. And the thing is, it's like a very relevant story for pretty much everyone nowadays, because we all kind of feel this burden that we have with life. Like maybe we're not actually pushing a boulder up a hill, but every day we're fighting traffic. Every week we're going to a job we don't enjoy. We're doing this over and then we have these things that we want, like we really want to get a higher education, so we go to do this degree, and then every week we're taking these classes and we're doing this thing and we're doing that thing, and it's like it almost feels like life loses the joy in it. And it's a very interesting story, because in the end, though, you have to imagine Sisyphus being happy. So then how do we imagine ourselves being happy when we deal with this stuff?
Well, whenever I teach it, I always tell my students, I'm like, focus on the last line and try and figure out what Camus is talking about. Because in the myth, he actually says, and you make a great point. He says, he compares Sisyphus to the workman today, to the person living today. And Camus was writing this in the 1940s to 60s. Yeah, in that 50s area. Yeah, I was going to say 40s to 60s. I was going to pick a broad range because I'm terrible with dates. But, he's writing it back then, but he's thinking about, the person that's going to work. And like you said, even our regular everyday can feel like we're pushing a boulder up a mountain, because it's you end the day and it's like the next day the boulder's right there at the beginning and you got to push it back up again. Or you find yourself, you don't like your job, so you make a change, but then you got to go to school. It's like you have another mountain with another boulder, right? And it's like, no matter what you choose to do, everything takes time. Everything requires this, we all have, I think one way is we all have our boulders, right? We all have our burden that we're trying to get up that mountain, and it always rolls back down because it's the next day restarts. And life can feel this very monotonous, torture almost, right? And he even says, it's the myth becomes tragic when the hero is conscious. When you have self-awareness, that's when it becomes tragic, because you're aware that the boulder keeps starting at the bottom, and you keep pushing it up, but you're never it feels like you're not making any progress, right? We're not reaching some goal. And I think we feel this way too with just happiness in general, or like the idea of a good life, right? We all want to live that good life, but it's like sometimes it feels like it's not, like we talked about this before, it's not necessarily a goal to achieve. So it's like, it's that funny problem where we think of it as a goal. We think it's like, oh, if I just get this boulder to sit on that mountain, I'll be happy. But the problem is gravity exists and the boulder won't.
Yeah, I like your analogy of wanting the boulder to sit up there with the goals, because you can either look at it on like a short time frame, on like a day to day where every day is pushing
Yeah.
it up the hill, or you can look at it on kind of like a goal based thing where the goal is pushing it up the hill. And it's interesting how no matter what, the boulder never stays up there. Like you can't push it up to where it stays up there. And I've tried to delude myself so many times with thinking that once I achieve that goal, that'll be it. Like every time I set out for these goals, I'm like, oh yeah, as soon as I achieve it, the boulder will stay up there. And it never does, because then it just rolls down the other side. So yeah, that's a really interesting part. But like,
What?
I mean, I can so kind of like feel in line with this myth, because when you wake up in the morning, like you got to get ready for work, and then you go to work and you got to do a whole bunch of stuff you don't want to do, and then you get home and you got to work out and you got to do all this stuff, and then finally you have like an hour while you're exhausted. You have like an hour to actually do what you want to do in the day, which is never enough time. And then like that's like the moment when the boulder's coming down the hill when you're not actively pushing it up, and then you have to go back to sleep and start pushing it up the hill again. And like I can so relate to this story on living in a day-to-day basis.
And it's funny too, because it's like, like work, if you don't do your job, you'll lose your job, you lose your income. Exercise, if you stop exercising, you lose all the progress you made, right? So it's like everything we take on can feel like a new boulder, because it's like it's this perpetual activity that we have to keep working on to keep ourselves at that spot or at that level, right? And I think that's what's so difficult about it. And it's funny because there's at the very beginning when Camus starts to like sort of starts to give us this myth, he says at the very beginning, he says myths are made for the imagination to breathe life into them, right? So like myths are like usually like parables or stories with some sort of lesson or point, or they make some claim about the human condition, at least in the way Camus is reading it. And I always like that idea that we can look at these myths and we breathe life into them by imagining what's happening, maybe imagine ourselves in the situation, and through that we can maybe come to some understanding of what the purpose of the myth is, what is the the goal of this story, what is it trying to tell us. And you said there too, like that you get that hour, right? And he actually says that for Sisyphus, he gets the boulder up, and the part that interests him is when he has to walk back down the mountain. He calls it the hour of consciousness, or the breathing space, right? He has to turn around, walk down, and get the boulder. So he does get this little bit of time to himself. And that for Camus seems to be the crucial point of this myth, is that he is conscious. And when you're pushing a boulder, you can't think, right? You're engaged in such physical activity. It's like, when you're going about your day to day, it feels like that sometimes. Like we don't get a chance to really like reflect, to think, to enjoy life. Like we're just distracted all the time. And I think that part of the myth is important too, that, when we're in these activities, we can also miss out on life because we're not really aware of what we're doing. We're distracted by the task. We're distracted by the effort. And we're not really like fully conscious and aware of the present. We're in the moment. That makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Like there's a whole bunch of parts that I wanted to comment on about that. But like what you're saying about being in the present, because we talk about kind of the small delights, and that because it's so counterintuitive. Like we spend all our time focused on the future, but like the future is closer to death, which is less life. But like we spend all of our time and all of our energy trying to get there to the future instead of being here in the present. And like I'm doing this all the time now, where I'll be doing something that yesterday I wanted to do, but today I'm doing it and I'm thinking about what I'm supposed to do tomorrow. And I keep catching myself in that because I'm like, what am I doing? Like, this is the thing that I wanted to do so much yesterday. Now that I'm doing it, I'm totally focused on the next thing, completely missing out on all of this.
Well, it's funny. It's like, when you hear people say like, oh, I want to get my savings up to 20,000 or 100,000 or 1,000,000. And then they reach that point, and as soon as they reach it, they're like, oh no, it's 2 million or 10 million or 100,000 or whatever, right? They're on to the next goal and they're looking ahead again. They don't even enjoy the fact that they reached it. Sometimes it doesn't even register. And it's true for so much in our lives. It's really funny. Like, we are constantly, in a way, like distracted from the moment, I think. And people, whether you're living in the past because of something that happened and you've never gotten over it, or whether you're always looking towards the future, the next goal, it's like you're never living when you're actually alive in the moment. You're always like, your brain's always somewhere else.
Yeah.
And
it's interesting because, like, especially for a while, I was like really deep into meditation and all this stuff. And there was like this big goal, like fixation about being enlightened. It's like, oof, once I'm enlightened, like that's it. Like, ooh, once I'm enlightened. And it's funny because like a lot of, I don't exactly know what enlightenment is. I mean, I'm definitely not enlightened, but it's like enlightenment is kind of just like focusing on what you're doing right now. So it's like, you're already there. Like, you can just do it right now. Like, you're totally 100% enlightened now if you just focus on what's right here. But we're so focused on this theoretical goal. Like, we live in these fantasy worlds.
You know what it is too? It's like, it's fun. And like, it's such a funny thing to say about it too, because it's like, we're so worried about expectations, artificial values, artificial desires, all these things that are sort of like constructs of society that we don't even realize what we're doing. And we don't even enjoy the life we're living because we're so caught up in other crap. And I think that's a big part of, what Camus is trying to get at with the human condition and the myth of Sisyphus, right? Is that we're all caught up in this sort of like pushing this boulder up, this pointless labor, right? And he says at the very beginning, he said, when the gods came up with Sisyphus's torture, they thought the worst punishment would be pointless and purposeless labor, just labor with no end. Like, that's the worst thing for a conscious person, because it's like, if you're conscious and you can never reach the goal, it's like, once you know that, it's like, it just becomes harder and harder to do, right? It becomes more and more of a torture. And I think we all feel that. It's like, when you're young, you get into college, you're excited, you're like, I'll get a job, blah, blah, blah. It's like, then you get out and you realize like, oh, it's this for the next 50 years,
until
right?
I
Or
die.
whatever, right? Yeah, basically, right? With no real purpose to it unless you create one, no real point unless you make it, no meaning unless you give it meaning, right? It's just going to be this day in and day out. And I think that's where so many of us struggle, because like, for Camus, at least, he's one of the existentialists, and he thinks, one of our biggest problems, I think, and this goes back all the way like to Nietzsche, is nihilism, is that pointlessness, the meaninglessness of existence. That, Sartre said it very well. He said, we're thrown into existence, and like the only thing we know, the only fact we know is that we'll die. That's it. Everything else, it's like there's no guidebook given to us. There's no like manual. There's nothing. So how do we live our lives? What's meaningful? Why are we doing anything? That's all up to us. And if we don't solve it, we're just kind of pushing a boulder up a hill with no end. Right? And it's until you eventually just, one day the boulder rolls over you, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like in the end, like the last sentence where he says, you have to imagine Sisyphus is happy. And I was kind of thinking about that because like you learn a little bit about Sisyphus before he has to push this boulder up the hill. And he's a bit of a shyster. Like he cheats death twice. Like death goes to put him in chains and he ends up putting the chains on death. And then like he gets brought back. So like he's kind of trying to find the loopholes in life and enjoy life and kind of make the most of it. And when I was hearing about that, it almost reminded me of Zorba the Greek, who's just a guy who it's a story about this guy who just likes to live life to the fullest. He's like, sometimes you just need to undo your belt and just get in trouble or whatever.
Go for it.
Yeah, exactly. And so that last sentence where it says you have to imagine Sisyphus is happy, I kind of almost imagine him like almost laughing at the gods this whole time that he's doing it. Like they think that it's punishment for him, but really he's kind of laughing at the gods because he's enjoying it more than anything else. And it kind of, you can kind of make those parallels in life a little bit. And it really comes back to perspective. So like we kind of take a look at life as, yes, if you look at it one way, it can be pushing a boulder up a hill. But, another way to look at it, perspective, is like, oh, I'm living in America. Oh, I'm healthier than most of the population. Oh, I have a very good, like, I can drive a car.
Yeah.
Like, all these things that we take for granted and that we curse because we have to be in traffic and, we have to grocery shop and buy a new washing machine, and like all these things that we kind of curse about, if we kind of change our perspective on them, we can actually enjoy them a lot more, and kind of almost try and find the fun in what we're doing. Like, for instance, when I used to work as a veterinarian, I really didn't like the profession, but
Yeah.
I used to like, I used to get a kick out of like having conversations with the clients, because like I was the only veterinarian that could actually talk with people. Like, I don't understand, but everybody else got into veterinary medicine because they like animals and they hate people. And me, I just accidentally got into the profession. So like having conversations with the people, and like they would just be like blown away that I greeted them when I entered the room. And it was just like, it's finding these little things in what you're doing that can just, you find that enjoyment.
No, I think that its perspective is really what it's about, right? Because it's about understanding too that it's your life and that you choose these things. You choose your attitude. You choose how you respond. Because look, and Camus points this out, there's really two. If you look at Sisyphus' situation, right? It's a torture if he thinks the gods condemned him to this punishment and that it's their fault. If he blames the gods, he doesn't have control of his life, his fate, right? So he's suffering because some external force said, no, you did something wrong. Now you have to do X. And you're going to do X forever. And you're going to suffer because of it. But Camus says once he starts walking back down, he gets this chance to think. He gets this chance to sort of reflect, to be conscious. Sometimes he'll be sad. Sometimes he'll be happy. It's going to change all the time. But he can think back on his life. And he says when he starts to realize that he's in the situation he's in because of all the choices he made, of all the things he did, it sounds like, on the one hand, you might think, well, wait, isn't he just like condemning himself to the torture that the gods gave him? On the other hand, he's taking control. He's saying, no, it's not that the gods put me here. It's that this is my fate. I make of it what I will. They can only make this a torture if I let them make it a torture, right? And I think that's part of it, is recognizing that when we let the outside determine our attitude, determine our thinking, we lose effectively, because we can never win in that situation. Our life is always out of our control, and it feels like, we have no freedom, no ability to choose how we think. When we realize that we have control over how we think, we can interpret our past however we want. We can interpret our future however we want, and we can interpret the moment however we want. And I think that's what's crucial for Camus. It's that freedom of thought, that freedom to sort of interpret your past and your present however you want, that you have control of that. That's what's crucial. And I think you make a good point, right? That you can look at it like, oh, this traffic sucks every day. Or you can be like, this is great. I can drive a car. I can do all these things. I get to do this, right? I get to push the boulder up the mountain. And I get the chance to reflect on my life. And part of it is just, putting together, sort of reflecting on our past, our experiences, and making them meaningful, right? Saying, I am the person I am now because of all these things that happened, recognizing that connection and taking control of who I am, my fate. Seeing it as something that I caused, not something that was caused by external factors. I think that is crucial. At one point he actually says, because like the Greeks had all the tragic myths. You had, you had the, the Iliad, the Odyssey, right? You have all these stories that are fairly tragic, and then you have the tragic plays. And he says that Sisyphus, he says he concludes all is well, just like Odysseus did, right? He says, this is a quote. He says, I conclude all is well, and that remark is sacred. It echoes in the wild and limited universe of man. It teaches that all has not been exhausted. And I really like that, because it suggests like the limitless possibilities in how we interpret our world, our reality, the limitless possibilities, because we're meaning making, right? The meaning is not out there to find. We create it. And once you realize that, I think Camus thinks the possibility for happiness opens up.
That's a really good point, because it's he who believes he can and he who believes he can't are both usually right. Confucius said that. Henry
Right.
Ford said that. A whole bunch of other people have been quoted as saying that.
Everybody smarts at it.
Yeah,
At some point.
but it's this crazy self-fulfilling prophecy, because like when you're in a bad state of mind, you're like, the world sucks. And because you're in that state of mind and you're looking for that, you find evidence that the world sucks. And then it's the hardest thing you'll ever have to do in your entire life to switch your perspective to the world is actually getting better. All is well. But as soon as you switch that perspective, the whole entire world changes. And it's like, wow, why would anyone look at it any other way? It's like both are occurring at exactly the same time. And you have the choice which one you want to pursue. And if you want to pursue life sucks, then go for it. But I guarantee your life is going to suck. And
it's going to suck.
Yeah. And granted, you could, and here's the other thing. You could also choose all is well. And the first 2 years of all is well, you just get kicked in the teeth. That can happen too. But you stick with it long enough, and eventually life gets tired of beating up on you, and all is well.
Yeah, and you know what's funny? It's like, I mean, I still find myself flipping back and forth all the time. Like just literally last week, like I felt like everything sucked. And then like, you know, I recognized, identified it, made some changes. And it's like, and then all of a sudden it's like, it's like a total transformation. It's amazing. And like, it really is true though, dude. It's like, it really is up to us to choose how we're going to view things. And saying all as well is just saying like, there's no point to any of this anyway, right? I mean, Camus firmly believed that there is no overall meaning. There is no overall purpose. There are no gods to condemn us to eternal tortures or to judge us for doing this or that. So at the end of the day, it's all really just what matters to you. What do you value? How are you going to make this life meaningful? You're in control. It's your life. You have to live it. And if you keep distracting yourself, running away from it, denying it, if you never face it consciously, if you never think about it, it's probably going to be bad. And you're probably not going to be happy. And you know, it's funny when he says one must imagine Sisyphus happy. Part of that is that we have to imagine him happy because that's our possibility for happiness is tied up with Sisyphus, right? That if Sisyphus can be happy, we can also be happy. And we can be happy because we can determine the conditions of our happiness. We can determine what makes life meaningful and why. And I think that's really, it's a really beautiful myth in that way because he captures this so nicely in like 4 pages. It's amazing. It really is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also like another part of that story is just like, you know, choosing life, because on the one hand, we know we're going to be pushing this boulder up the hill. Like no matter where you are, like whether things are going great for you or they're not, there's going to be difficulties in life. There's going to be problems in life. Sometimes it's going to feel like just nonstop pushing a boulder up a hill. And it's the idea of choosing life despite all of that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's choosing it. And also, dude, recognizing that we are conscious. We have self-awareness. Look at the rest of the world. The trees don't get to choose where they grow, right? The other animals, like their life, they might get, you know, bunny rabbits are eaten constantly, right? They're like the Dorito chips of the natural world, you know? It's like, that's why they reproduce so fast. Like life is brutal, dude, for other things. And they're not even aware of it, but we are lucky. We're aware. We can decide. We can take an otherwise indifferent world, an otherwise meaningless existence, and make it into something meaningful, make it into something that matters to us, and live in a way where we can be happy with ourselves and show other people how to. And I think that's like one of the most amazing things in the world, right? Is that we have the potential to do that if we choose it, like you said.
Definitely. And another thing with this myth, like last week we were talking about kind of feeling stuck in the middle. And we were talking about how really all experiences have like a beginning and middle and the end. And so really it comes back to perspective. So like Sisyphus is kind of doomed for eternity to push this boulder up a hill. So like you look at it as this overall thing as, oh, I'm just pushing this boulder up a hill forever. There's no end to it. But that's not true, because each time there's a beginning when it's down at the bottom and he starts pushing it up. There's the middle where he's pushing it up. And then there's the end where it rolls back down and he has to go get it. And so like I oftentimes find that as like an illuminating part of life. Like when I'm encountering the most difficult times in life, I try and break down my day into like, can I just get through this day?
Yeah.
Because sometimes like the things you have to conquer and the stuff you have to deal with is just overwhelming. But I'm like, this day, can I get through this day? Can I do this as best as I can? And sometimes you even have to come down to like this hour. Can I get through this hour? And it helps.
I was just going to say that, like this minute, you know, it's just whatever you have to, however small an increment you have to make it, right? Because if you can get through it, you can get through it. And that's all. You can prove to yourself that you can get through it, right? And I think that's the other side of it too.
Yeah, I heard this story in one of the books that I read about this. I think it was after World War II. There were some guys whose plane crashed in like the India-Burma border, and they had to hike hundreds of miles through like dense jungle. And the first day of hiking, he stepped on a nail and had that rammed through his foot, and then he
Yeah.
had blisters all over. And he's like, I don't know if I can make it. And like everybody else was suffering just as badly. But it's like, can I just make it to that next peak? Can I just make it to the end of the day? And it's just like these little, instead of looking at the whole thing, like instead of being like, oh, I need to pay off all this debt, or instead of being like, oh, I have to work at this job for my whole entire life. It's like, just today. Like, can you just take today and do the best, like make today a masterpiece, do the best that you can today, and then stack those on top of themselves. Like I love this story about Will Smith. When he was, I think, 11, his dad knocked down a wall and then had Will and his brother rebuild it. And they're like, it's impossible. But his dad said, you have to do it. And so they just started stacking, like putting bricks, one brick after another. And it took them the whole summer or something like that. But eventually they did it. And they saw that like all you need to do is lay this one brick as best as you can lay it. And you just do that one time after another, after another, after another. And before you know it, you have a wall. And I think that's kind of like a really nice allegory for life, kind of like the myth of Sisyphus, because all he had to do was like push his boulder up the hill as best as he could and enjoy doing it. And you have to imagine him being happy and being like, ha ha, Zeus, you thought you were torturing me. I'm enjoying this.
Well, that's the great part though, is it's perspective. Because like you said, when you break it down like that, it's like he always has the walk back down. He always gets that time to think. He always gets that time to still be a conscious being. In a way that you might say the myth would have been worse if it was just an unending hill. And all he was doing was physical labor, but he still gets a chance to be conscious. And that's where he can win, because it's in our conscious minds that we can change everything. We can change the meaning, we can change the intent, because we have that power. And I think that's what's so powerful about the myth. Like you said, literally everything can be broken down. Like if you have too much debt, you pay just an extra dollar this time, right? And you can keep stacking that and keep building. And then maybe next time you pay an extra $5. You just keep doing it that way. Just like, like any trip, one foot in front of the other will eventually get you there. And it's like, but we get so caught up in looking at the big picture that we miss the fact that it's just a lot of little steps. And that we also miss the fact that we're conscious and we can decide how we look at it, how we perceive it. And I think that's the most powerful thing about this is, it's like happiness for Camus seems to be like an attitude, a choice, way of thinking, of being in self-control, right? It's about taking ownership of your life, not letting others own it. And that's where happiness lies. And I think it's a really interesting conception of it, because it's not a goal. And for Sisyphus, right, there is no goal. So it's not like he's going to reach happiness, but he can be happy. And I think that's what I love about it. It's not that happiness is not like, oh, you got to be virtuous, you got to do this and that, you got to collect all these things, then you'll be happy. It's, oh, you can be happy right now. It's just a matter of, your mental state and your choice.
Yeah, I always like that. How when I was younger, I would always say, when I have this, then I'll be happy, or when I do that, then I'll be happy, or once I'm there, then I'll be happy. And I started to realize that I always got to those points and then I wasn't happy. So, so now whenever that comes up, I always flip it on its head. So like, because that thought still comes up. It's like so deeply programmed, that if then programming, that like it still comes up. I'm like, once I achieve this goal, then I'll be happy. Once I realize that, I'm like, oh no. Once I'm happy, then I'll have that goal. And then I just work on enjoying where I am and enjoying the process and all that stuff.
Well, that's the other thing that's nice about Sisyphus, right? It's like he can say, once I get this boulder up to the top, but it's just going to roll back down. He's going to have to always do it over. And that's really true in our lives. Like, I think we, when we're younger, we go to school, we develop that mindset of once I get this, then that, because we have grade school, it's very structured. You go through each grade, you get your degrees, you go to college, and it seems like, oh, life is just stacking these things like this. It's just one little goal after another. But the reality is it's not really what life is. You can try and live that way, but you're not going to be happy. You're just pursuing goals arbitrarily. and you have to still give the meaning, the purpose. You still have to make it into something. And I think that's what's cool. Like, because you can be happy the whole time. You don't have to just wait for it.
Yeah. And there's also happiness to be had in the struggle. Like,
Yeah.
I know when I was like working really hard as a veterinarian and I didn't want to do it, that even though I was suffering then, I knew I was working towards something that I really, really wanted. So like even in the difficulty, it was still 100% worthwhile. And even though like I hated it, it was still like, this is getting me where I want to go. So it's necessary and I enjoy it because of that.
Yeah, but you also recognize that that life wasn't right for you, and you made it meaningful by giving yourself a purpose beyond it, right? That this will be the means to living how I want. This will be the way that I get there, and I'm going to do it as fast as possible, right? And I think that's the thing that we often forget, is that when we're struggling with something, we can look beyond it. We can make it meaningful in a different way by changing our perspective on it. Whether it's gratitude, whether it's saying thank you that I am able to do this, whether it's well, this is going to be a way to get to that point, and that point's where I want to be, so I'm going to do that. Whether it's just, hey, I'm glad I have new experiences, whatever it is, right? You can change it, and you can have that control.
Yeah. I think that's something that is missing out a lot nowadays with the whole like social media and everything. And especially with like Zuckerberg. Like he was such a big success. So or him and Justin Bieber, like Zuck and Bieber, because of them, everybody
Zuck and
thinks,
Beaver, good old Zuck and Beaver.
Everybody thinks that if you're not a success at 18 years of age, that you've completely missed out. And I've been reading a lot of biographies of very, very influential people. Like Abraham Lincoln was a complete failure until his mid 40s.
Yeah.
People don't think about that. Like it doesn't register. Henry Ford, complete failure until his mid 40s. Edison,
I think I told you this. Nietzsche, in one of his lectures, he points out that there's this Greek historian who just assumes that everybody was 40 when they did their best work. So that's how he determines their age. It's just like, he must have been 40. That's
Yeah, and
you're
so
mature
like
enough, Yeah.
exactly. So like now we're so jaded. We think like if you make it past 20 and you're not an ultra CEO executive traveling the world in your private jet, you're a complete failure and a loser, that it just completely derails anybody from even trying. And like one of the things that I think is very useful for everyone to understand is like most people who are successes, not all of them, because granted, you can always find the outliers, but most
Yeah.
people who are successes had to overcome some insane obstacles to get there. And so like just because your life is difficult and it sucks now, it's not the end. Like you have a very, very good life, but that life is in your future and you have to work towards it. It's intentional. You have to put in effort, but you can, like, the coolest thing is that you can literally go and do and be whatever you want in life, pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are a few
it's up to you.
limitations. Yeah.
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 Yeah. It's up to you. You have to make the choice. I mean, like but that's just it. I think you hit the nail on the head. Is so many people, they get bummed out. They look at the world we live in. They look at these ultra successes where it seems easy because it happened so young. They fail to really process the fact that like there's so many, that there's luck, there's circumstance, they were working on something ahead of time before they hit that success. I mean, it's like we forget all the other things that factor in. And then we act like, well, I can't do anything now. My life's over. It's like, but you still have 40 years, 50 years, likely, It's like, that's a whole lifetime. You can still do so much. And but it's up to you. If you choose not to, you're going to definitely fail. And that's the problem. I think it's so easy to get ourselves, because I think that's that whole misery thing, right? It's like, it's so easy to just stay in your normal situation that sucks and say, well, this is secure. I know this little box. So I'll just trap myself in this box, even though I'm unhappy. And, but you got to remember Sisyphus was trapped and he was still able to find that happiness, because at some point I think we can break through it and start to see it differently. And I think that's really what is crucial.
Yeah. And one thing that we were talking about before we started recording this episode was like last week we were both kind of stuck in the middle, and it was because we were avoiding taking that first kind of uncomfortable, painful step. And that's oftentimes like the difference between being stuck and breaking through to the next level. It's like taking that first step. Because even though you may have a whole bunch of steps afterwards, usually that first step and the first few steps are the most uncomfortable. And so it's actually like getting out there and doing that and taking that step that'll enable you to get there.
Well, it's funny too, because we trick ourselves into thinking we've taken steps. Like we were both stuck in something similar where like we were trying to learn something before starting it, when in reality we just need to start the project, because you can learn forever and it feels good because you're like, yeah, I'm getting better at this. I know more, and it's like I'm doing better, but it's like, well, I haven't really started yet. It's really a diversionary tactic, right? To sort of distract yourself, but you feel nice about it. So it's like, it is funny, but then it starts to you start to realize that you're not really doing anything at some point and you have to just go with it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's kind of the point of I think that's like a broader point you can take away, which is like, look, if you want to be happy, you have to take ownership, you have to take control, and you have to be an agent in the world. We have this ability. We're not like the rest of, philosophers have been noting this forever, right? We're not like other living things. We are very different. We can change our environment. We can change our minds. We can decide how we interpret life, what's valuable, what's meaningful. We create, it's all a human construct, but make it your construct, not just the construct that's out there, right? I think that's the crucial thing.
Mm-hmm.
Make it your own, make it meaningful on your own terms,
Yeah. I kind of, and, with that, making it meaningful, like bringing in the myth of Sisyphus and bringing it to our lives. So, like, there is one difference between Sisyphus and us. Sisyphus was doing this for eternity. We're all going to die.
Yeah.
So, like, even though we have to push this boulder up the hill over and over again, realizing that we're going to die, how can we make this as meaningful and as good for ourselves as possible? And I think that's a really good question that we all need to ask ourselves, is like, how can we make this worthwhile for ourselves?
Yeah, recognizing that it's not infinite, it's not eternal, it's finite. And I think, but what Camus points out as well is that, like, if there is no meaning, there is no purpose, it's also freeing, because it also means that you can do whatever you want. You can think whatever you want. And at the end of the day, you're going to die just like everybody else. It doesn't matter.
Mm.
And in a way, I think that, it sounds grim, but I think it's also freeing, because what it's saying is you get one shot, make it your life, make it the best life you can with the time you have left, with the skills you have, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Bitch all you want, it doesn't matter. Life goes on, right? Do the best you can. That's great, because the only thing that matters is how you interpret it. That's it. Everything else doesn't make a difference.
Yeah. It's such a trip because, like, I think about this stuff on a regular basis. Like, these people who I knew, like grandparents, family, even friends our own age who died, who are no longer here. And it's just like, like, I take it for granted all the time, but like, I have this gift that they don't have anymore. Like, I have this chance to experience life. And it's just like, it's like, I feel like I was just there with them, like experiencing life with them, and now they're not here anymore. And it's like such a mind trip. Yeah.
But you are alive, and I think, Sartre said it well too. He said, like, we're alone with no excuses, right? There's no excuse not to make this the best life you can, to take advantage of your ability to choose, to determine your own life, to determine your perspective, right? And I think, when we get so caught up in the negative, we really overlook the real benefits that we have, the real gift that we have, which is we're still of existence. We're still alive. For this short time, we're here, and that's amazing. You can waste all your time you want thinking about why we're here, what it means, blah. The fact is at the end of the day, it's up to you to decide, and you're here. So do something with it.
Mm-hmm. Great point. So, Myth of Sisyphus, any takeaways for people who didn't want to read the book for class? You should know.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think, people didn't want to read. I mean, I think, Camus is like other existentialists, right? I think he's very much interested in authenticity, and he's very much interested in, looking at our consciousness, our self-awareness, and recognizing that with that, there's like this whole world opens up, because it means that if we're aware, we have all the power to make everything as meaningful or horrible as we want. It's really up to us. I mean, I think that, to me, the myth of Sisyphus always speaks to our power of, interpretation, our power of meaning making, and really how powerful it is. But it's up to us to use it it's up to us to make that choice, to take ownership, and to recognize that when we do take ownership of it and we start acting in the world and being agents, good or bad, it's going to be up to us to also decide, right? We can be happy now. We don't have to wait. There's nothing to wait for. There's no gift of happiness that comes. It's something you decide. And I really like that idea.
Definitely. Yeah, it's a good one. And I would just like to say that, like, when you're struggling and going through something, like, get something out of it, because you're already in pain. You know, get something out of it, make it worthwhile. Like, don't lose a lesson, and just it may hurt, but there's something to be gotten from it. So that's my
there is. And just to add to that, right, that even if you think you're going to get that boulder to the top, there's just going to be another boulder. Like Camus says, Sisyphus always returns to his boulder, his burden, right? We always return to something. So don't try and trick yourself by thinking that there's a magic end to the process. The end is death. So for us, at least, not for Sisyphus.
It's like
always return to something.
It's like asking a better question. Like, how can I enjoy this difficulty? Boom.
Well, it's like, you see people do it all the time. They imagine, like, oh, once I have a ton of money, I'll have no problems. And it's like, you're still alive, dude. You're still going to have problems. Things are still going to happen. It would just solve a lot of your main problems now, but it's not going to fix everything. Mm-hmm. I think that's
because then you got the problem, like, okay, I've got all the money in the world. I've done everything I want to do. Now what do I do with my life? That's the next problem you get. Yeah. Boom.
You still have to make it meaningful, right? You're still alive.
Awesome. Well, so that is it for episode 58 of the Existential Stoic podcast on the Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus. Make sure to join us midweek for a short quick fix, and then we will see you back next week. I'm Randy. That's my buddy Danny. I'll see you later, Danny.
Later, Randy.